Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tulohoyane. A lot of things happened in the Pretoria High Court today. If you just read between the lines of what Baloyi is up to in that trial. Let me begin with where Baloyi started this morning. You'll recall that when the court adjourned last week, we are all expecting that we would get the tracker records of all the Ekurhuleni metro vehicles that were used to escort the police as they were undertaking this investigation and ferrying the accused persons from place to place. We'll recall that we are promised that this will be made available today or soon thereafter. But to the surprise of everybody, and to my surprise, and I want to be very frank with this, I was very surprised. But knowing Baloyi, I was not, taken completely by surprise also. But we began the day by telling the court that the cars that were being used, the Ekurhuleni metro cars that were being used to escort the police as they undertook this investigation could be divided into, let me have a look again, I think 3 categories. The first category of cars belonged to were those cars which were allocated to the cold case unit. And these were all Ekurhuleni metro vehicles. And he says those vehicles, he counts about, let me just get back to my records here. He says there were 4 vehicles. There was an Audi A3, there was a white BMW, there was a white Nissan double cab, there was a white Isuzu double cab. But he starts off by saying that there's an affidavit, mark my words, an affidavit made by an official of the Ekurhuleni Metro who had access to all the vehicles of the Ekurhuleni Metro Council. Now, according to that affidavit, he says these cars were allocated to the SWAT team in 2020 and that there were no AVL, mark my words right there, that there were no AVL, there was no AVL data for the period of 2020, specifically for the months of May, June, and July. That is what this affidavit by this gentleman disclosed as, read to the court by Baloyi. This gentleman says he did a thorough search of the fleet for this exercise, and he also looked for the legacy data. In other words, this would relate to any other service provider, who had provided tracking devices for those vehicles prior to 2020. So he says this particular gentleman, in that affidavit by that gentleman, that there was no record, even prior to 2020. So no AVL records for those cars, even prior to 2020 and even during 2020. He also says that there were no AVL records for all those vehicles. The second category of vehicles include those which were used by crime intelligence, specifically by the late Sergeant Mabena, who used a Toyota Baki. Baloyi told the court, as we all know, that Sergeant Mabena had a fatal accident in this white Toyota Hilux Baki, and that particular vehicle was not fitted with an AVL. He also went to tell the court that Mabena's vehicle's logbook could also not be traced. So Baloyi went on to say that that particular vehicle that Mabena used to use, you'll recall that Mabena died on the 23rd of December 2022. That white car, following the accident of Mabena, was a write-off and was sold as scrap. Right? So this particular gentleman indicated that this car had been written off and it had been sold as scrap, so that, there is no trace of this vehicle. There is also the issue of the Polo Vivo, and he told the court that which was used on the 26th of October 2014. This particular gentleman says in the affidavit that he searched for the logbooks of the Polo, the VW Polo, and could not find any record of the logbooks relating to that Polo also. That, in a nutshell, is what Baloyi told the court. And it is all very shocking. To start with, Baloyi goes before court and reads an affidavit deposed to by somebody else. An affidavit that, in essence, has got nothing to do with him. So that the person who can, read from that affidavit is the person who has deposed to that affidavit. So Baloyi resorts to that affidavit and purports to tender evidence around these vehicles, which he says, according to the affidavit, have no AVL records. That is very improper and very irregular, and should have been vehemently objected to by the defense. Because, you see, the person best placed to give that evidence is the person who deposed to that affidavit under oath. And Baloyi, I recall him telling the court that, well, if they want this particular gentleman here, he can simply come and confirm the contents of this affidavit. But with all due respect to Baloyi, it goes far beyond that. You see, an affidavit cannot be cross-examined. It cannot be cross-examined. If the person who has deposed to that affidavit is still available, and these people are still available because they have just deposed to affidavits, they should be brought before that court to be cross-examined by the defense so that the veracity of what they are saying can be established. it is improper and simply not good enough for Baloyi just simply to read an affidavit and hand it in as if that affidavit, or in an endeavor to have that affidavit constitute evidence as to whether these vehicles had AVL records or not. Because you see, this AVL record evidence, like Advocate Mnisi has always said, is going to be very crucial in this trial. Now, all of a sudden, none of these vehicles have AVL records. Logbooks of some of them cannot be found. It even goes beyond 2020, because you'll recall that the accused were arrested in 2020. He even says records prior to 2020 of this vehicle, AVL records, are not available. How strange. But you see, the truthfulness of that can only be established if this particular gentleman who deposed to this affidavit comes before that court and testifies about these AVL records, so that he can be cross-examined by Mnisi and others around this mysterious disclosure or shocking disclosure that all those vehicles did not have AVLs installed on AVL devices installed. Now, the strangest thing of all is this. About a week ago, Sergeant Lissering was before that court. And I recall very well, very vividly, the circumstances around his appearance before that court. You see, Constable Lissering confirmed before Judge Ratamukhatli that there were 4 cars involved which belonged to the Ekurhuleni Metro, and then 2 of them had been written off and 2 of them were still functional. And he also confirmed who the drivers were Jonathan Butelezi Munari and Mapumulo. It was at that stage that Judge Ratamukhatli asked Constable Lissering, by the way, that was Judge Rata's question, by the way, were all these cars fitted with AVL devices or gadgets? And Constable Lissering replied, yes, they were all fitted with AVL records. And Judge Rata asked him yet again, and he confirmed once more that they were in fact fitted with AVL records. Now you'll recall that it was at that stage when the court was making that rather informal inquiry. But it will recall that it was at that stage that Baloyi stood up and Judge Ratamukhatli said to him, what is your problem? What is your problem? Baloyi was visibly disturbed by that statement or that disclosure by Lissering that all EMPD vehicles had tracker devices installed in them. Baloyi then stood up to say that, well, this is, a challenging situation. All this can only be established once we have a full record of those, AVLs. And I noted that, Baloyi's intervention at that stage after Lissering had made that disclosure, was really intended to divert attention away from what Lissering had just told that court. So now come this week, Baloyi is now telling the court, through this affidavit, we should be thrown out of that court, that all these cars had no AVL gauges fitted into them. So that, in essence, we don't have any AVL records. That is what Baloyi would like us to believe. But how then do you explain that evidence by Constable Lissering, or that disclosure by Constable Lissering before Judge Ratamkhwatli, that they all had tracker devices installed in them? Another baffling development in the sense of MEYIWA trial. So this is just one aspect of today's proceedings which I want to bring to your attention. That you see, Baloyi leaves evidence before that court that he wants to lead. He has conveniently come up with this affidavit by this metro official, and he just wants to do away with those AVL records. But you see, he cannot just that easily just do away with those AVL records, because Constable Lissering has already told the court that all EMPD vehicles had tracker records installed in them. So where does Baloyi get this other official who says there were no AVL records? Why does he not come up with Constable Lissering for Lissering to confirm that in fact all EMPD vehicles had tracker devices installed in them? I just want to stop there for today. Tomorrow morning, I'm bringing you further developments in the sense of MEYIWA trial. This was just one portion of what caught my attention this morning. And so, having said that, let me thank you for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, and share these videos. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening.